Our planet is facing complex, serious problems. Throughout history, philosophers have attempted to grasp fundamental challenges over a very long time frame. In this session, we will look into how world philosophy can cooperate with other fields and open up new possibilities for the future. The moderator for this session is NOTOMI Noburu, professor of the Graduate School of Humanities and Sociology at the University of Tokyo. So, Professor Notomi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and welcome to panel 2. So this is philosopher's session. I myself study ancient Greek philosophy, and our 3 guest speakers are all leading philosophers in the world. So this panel focuses on philosophy, and we will discuss what can we philosophers do, and what is a philosophy that will enable us to respond to the world crises. So first, I'll give you a brief introduction of the panel. Confronting global problems requires philosophy, I believe. It requires fundamental and long-term and reflexive thought, not coping strategies. We should believe in rationality and universality. However, I believe that philosophy in academic today is unfortunately inadequate or not ready to meet this challenge. So philosophy became one of the academic disciplines, but could not be a living wisdom that would change the world. So we need a new philosophy, which should include multiple levels, traditions, especially non-European perspectives. We Japanese philosophers started world philosophy from 2018. So it's a big project, include various fields of philosophy in the universities. So we aim for convergence of knowledge to include science, everyday life, and culture. So this is one of the result. This is 9 volumes of a history of world philosophy published in 2020. Philosophy for dialogue. To everyone, political and social, to overcome political and social divisions and confronts, philosophy must achieve true dialogue. But dialogue is a key in society, but philosophically speaking, dialogue is not a simple or a single concept. True dialogue cannot be achieved if this important point is ignored. So we should, for example, we should avoid irresponsible relativism or skepticism or post-truth and misologia. Dialogue is not necessary for consensus building or negotiation, but for a mutual understanding of differences and share concern for well-being and pursuit of truth. So dialogue is neither obvious nor easy. One of the important roles of philosophy is, I believe, to clarify what dialogue is or should be, both its potential and its limitation or dangers. So this is another picture of my book in Japanese, which I discuss Socratic and Platonic dialogue. And philosophy for the future, the final point. Philosophy is not to predict or prescribe, but prepare for the future. The key role is to envisage ideals, I believe. So ideals, the philosophical concept of ideal, is the adjective form of idea derived from Platonic philosophy. So the ideal is a rational model in speech, one that is openly discussed and attempted to be realized. So the philosopher's role, I believe, is to present some ideas to the public to discuss for the better future. So for that purpose, we should expand the scope to include Earth, the universe, virtual reality, human nature, AI, etc., and broadening the time span, including world philosophy or generational ethics. So universities should be the center of this new philosophy. Our session has three speakers, eminent distinguished philosophers. The first is Professor Dermot MORAN. He's teaching at Boston College. So he's joining us from the other side of the world. And he's talking about dreaming of common future, the constellation of philosophy. The next speaker is Professor Heisook Kim from Korea. And the third speaker is Professor Swanatha Anand from Thailand. So we can, I hope we can have a good discussion in this panel. So first, please, Dermot. Please start.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity to address this prestigious gathering, the Tokyo Forum. We need organizations like the sponsors of this gathering to provide a public forum and an open intellectual space, the Socratic agora, or the marketplace of ideas, in which to address problems freely and be able to bring together different perspectives from around the world to share ideas and discourse without conflict. So thanks to the University of Tokyo for being such a forum. Philosophy itself needs institutions. The world is in crisis. Today we are experiencing wars, pandemics, climate change, food insecurity, the mass migration of peoples, indeed the displacement of whole cultures, and the degradation of the environment of our life world. Just to mention some facts, between 2011 and 2021, more than 6.8 million refugees left Syria. By October this year, the UN listed 7.6 million Ukrainian refugees entering Europe. In September 2022, more than 1/3 of Pakistan was underwater due to flooding. In South America, massive regions of the Amazonian virgin forest are disappearing daily. Our oceans are being depleted and polluted. The wild Atlantic salmon, a symbol of wisdom, has almost completely disappeared. Even outer space is filled with human origin debris that pose risks for spacecraft. We have world leaders threatening to use tactical nuclear weapons. It seems our situation is very bleak. And this global uncertainty and sense of impending catastrophe is creating a real health crisis among our peoples, and is especially evident in the rising anxiety among children. How can we as philosophers help to alleviate anxieties, especially in young people who don't see a future, who don't even want to bring children into this world? There is a great responsibility on us as philosophers. But philosophy offers a vision of a shared future. We should not despair. The practice of philosophy has always been grounded in hope and in a sense of horizon and future. The challenge is how philosophy can also inspire and provide a shared, positive, and ennobling vision of the future that can be embraced by people universally. Now, the space in which philosophy operates, the realm of reason, the space of reasons, invigorated by imagination and disciplined by our passions and emotions, by the realm of the heart, may seem very small and limited and subjective. But in fact, it is very powerful. In my remarks today, I would like to briefly address how philosophy can inspire transformative change and renewal towards a common shared future. Philosophy must take a universal perspective. To borrow the Stoic term, we are all cosmopolitans, citizens of the world, indeed of the cosmos. We have to question our own partisan positions. The key is to frame the question in the right way, because understanding the question correctly leads towards a solution. But questioning is first of all self-questioning. We need to interrogate our own assumptions and our own most deeply held beliefs in order to hear the voice of the other within us. Responsibility means answerability. We answer for ourselves and from our hearts, but we must also be responsible for allowing the other to speak and to be respected and to express difference. Philosophers have long played the role of advisors to political leaders and have responded to the urgent crises of the age, even if they couldn't always convince their hearers. Socrates was a critic of aspects of Athens for which he was condemned to death by his native Athenians. St. Augustine felt the direct weight of the attacks on Rome by Alaric the Goth in 411 and felt the impending collapse of the Roman Empire. Boethius, from whom I have borrowed the title of my talk, wrote his Consolation of Philosophy in jail. The medieval Christian Margaret of Porret was burnt at the stake for preaching the need for the soul to empty itself in a very Buddhist manner. Wilhelm Hegel composed his extraordinary epic on the evolution of human consciousness, The Phenomenology of Spirit, when Napoleon's cannons could be heard outside Jena in 1806. Hegel was led to reflect on the forces that move history and how rationality could still prevail in times of crisis. In the 20th century, the German Jewish philosopher Hannah Arendt wrote about totalitarianism, which she experienced in Nazi Germany, and went on to Israel to observe and report on Eichmann's trial in Jerusalem, where she made the famous comment about the banality of evil. So philosophers have experienced at first hand human tyranny and injustice. The phenomenologist Edith Stein was put to death in Auschwitz concentration camp in 1942. But it was philosophy and their confidence in humanity that gave philosophers the resolve to face their tragic situations. As Professor Notomi has said, philosophy has to take the long view. It often approaches problems in terms of millennia rather than decades. As Hegel put it, the owl of Minerva takes its flight at dusk. In other words, a society must have arrived at a certain maturity for philosophy even to be able to influence and take a perspective on the trajectory of our existence. So we should not expect urgent responses. But despite its weaknesses and failures, philosophy has also been remarkably influential, and this should give us hope. It is no exaggeration to say that the world has been shaped by philosophy. Think of the impact of Greek democracy, or Confucianism, or liberalism, or Marxism, not to mention the birth of the natural and mathematical sciences, which came from philosophy. Philosophers such as Confucius, Aristotle, or Marx have provided the intellectual framework, the kin to religion's sacred canopy, for whole civilizations. Moreover, philosophy has made intellectual impact and moral progress. It is through the arguments that the philosophers that slavery was eventually regarded as a repugnant practice. Abolitionism was a successful movement driven by moral principles, often facing economic arguments. The ongoing revolution in terms of the place of women in society is another example of intellectual and moral progress made across the globe, largely through the arguments of philosophy. There is also increasing sensitivity to protect the environment and our natural world, the Green Revolution, and consider even the spread of education among all classes. Although people may argue about the sources of rights and their legitimation, people everywhere have a growing sense of their rights. Very few would challenge the idea of education as a fundamental right. There is even recognition now of the right to access the internet in the age of technology, so rights can evolve. The concept of toleration is another important contribution by Enlightenment philosophers. So I have great hope in the possibilities of philosophy to continue to lead and ameliorate our condition by generating new concepts. It was Kant who posed three fundamental questions about our interests. What can I know? What must I do? And what may I hope? Well, what should we do? We should follow the example of the philosophers, Augustine, Boethius, Hegel, Marx, and others, and continue to offer informed, critical, and self-critical reflections on our contemporary scene, not expecting immediate results, but taking the longer view. Philosophy is not just a talking shop or a promotion of the withdrawal from public life or a world-weary skepticism or a renunciation of life. All of these positions have been adopted by philosophers, but also philosophy brings the tools of reason, logic, and analysis, as well as the capacity to dream and to envision, to break up complex problems into their many component parts and set our problems in new contexts, which will promote solutions. It asks penetrating questions and is never satisfied with superficial answers. It also allows us to rise above our sectarian or ethnocentric interests and think about the whole, about humanity as such, about our vulnerable, beautiful, and fragile planetary existence. It seems to me that what philosophers must do in the face of turbulence, intolerance, injustice, and barbarity is to continue to practice their profession, to be a light in the darkness, to remain open to dialogue, to invite discussion with the other and the stranger, and to promote new dreams, new goals, new concepts, and new values. Philosophy gives a richness to culture which prevents us from sinking back into barbarism. So we need people to have a sense of the future. Surely it is the challenge to philosophy to envisage such a common framework of values that might inspire hope and action and praxis, another philosophical idea. Can we reach the ideal of a universal humanity? Can we inject morality everywhere, even into the heart of so-called objective science? Considering our increasing opposition to cruel experiments on animals or humans, I think this is distinctly possible. Philosophy needs to cultivate a very strong sense of ourselves as bound by a common humanity with a shared dependency on our planet Earth. We need a general acknowledgement of our vulnerability on the planet and our responsibilities to ourselves and to the planet as a whole. We are, as Edmund Husserl, the German philosopher, put it, the civil servants of humanity. We bear the burden of tradition, but we are also building an intellectual framework for the future. So I look forward to our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dermot. Well, Professor Dermot Moran is a world-leading phenomenologist and who collaborated with Japanese phenomenologists in the past. Okay, the second speaker is Professor Kim Heisook from Ewha Women's University. She's a very well-known feminist philosopher in East Asia. So please start.
Thank you. I'd like to start my talk by thanking Tokyo Forum 2022, made possible by the generous will and the envisioning thoughts of President Che, and also Professor Notomi by inviting me to this interesting panel. There are 3 points I'd like to make in my talk. First, there is just one. Yeah, thank you. First point is that philosophy and science have the same origin, purporting to attain the highest level of knowledge with universality and necessity, while they diverged into 2 different disciplinary areas after science took mathematics as its language. Philosophy instead stayed with natural language, with logic. The second point is, even though science won the battle in terms of objectivity and rigor of knowledge, philosophy has its own mission as a critique. And third point I would like to make is that we have to focus more on different kinds and forms of rationality and diversity in epistemological perspectives, including Asians and women's. Because of time limit, I'd rather go quickly over what I have prepared. Philosophy, especially in the Western tradition, has always yearned for rigorous knowledge, Wissenschaft. which has universality and necessity as mathematics and logic. Science has also yearned for the fundamental knowledge of the world in its entirety. Newton, for example, published his book on classical mechanics under the title of Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy, under the title of Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy. As science has defined our age with enormous success, positioning itself as the tribunal of final truth, scientific rationality comes to rule the society and human lives. More and more philosophers in Anglo-American tradition nowadays collaborate with the researchers in the field of science like psychology, neurophysiology, cognitive science, linguistics, logic, artificial intelligence, etc. Some philosophers even go further to advocate the naturalization of philosophy in scientific terms. After science absorbs much part of philosophy in terms of themes and problematics, one might ask, what would be left to philosophy? In the sense that philosophy does not vie with science for the question of what there is and accept the rules and the logic of scientific rationality, it is within the boundary of science. But if we think that philosophy is a discipline uniquely defined by the reflective questioning of itself, its own foundation, and the nature of human reason, philosophy cannot belong to science, nor be exhausted by scientific endeavors. Philosophy may not give us concrete knowledge of things in the world. Reflection does not produce empirical knowledge of things, but makes us understand the nature of human existence and the meaning of what exists. It even asks about the direction, the aim, and the justificatory basis of science. In this kind of reflective activity, philosophy goes beyond science. Philosophy as a meta or a transcendental discipline, here I use the term transcendental in Kantian sense, becomes a critique which lends a total perspective on the culture, including science. The COVID-19 radically changed our world and our ordinary lives in many aspects. For instance, the digitalization of society has been accelerated to the degree we could hardly imagine before. At the earlier stage of the spread of COVID-19, many of us thought that we as human beings were all subordinated to the same condition and luck. Whether we like it or not, we are living in the one world. Even if we could not avoid the pandemic, we might hope that we at least make it as an opportunity to learn such values as human solidarity, relatedness, and philanthropic spirit. But unfortunately, what we now find is the deepening sense of isolation, depression, and anxiety underlying the society. Future seems even more insecure and bleak as far as the existential condition of humans is concerned. Accelerated digitalization during the pandemic has exposed to us the proliferation of internet networking and the uncontrollable wide spread of linguistic and non-linguistic information by using images a lot. By dint of the development of digital technology and AI algorithms that produce fake news and confirmation bias among people, we are facing the social problems of alternative facts, distrust, and hate crimes. This may be a socio-political, cultural problem, but also a philosophical problem at a deeper level concerning what truth is and how to relate with others and with one's own self. Experiencing turning point in human civilization, many agree that the change and the transformation of future society would be radical and complex. Gender roles, family as an institution, human relations, and work ethics will change, which contributes to the blurring of strict boundaries set between women and men, husbands and wives, family and non-family, humans and non-humans like machines, and so on. We will also witness enormous changes in the rules of democracy, economy, and world orders as we witness these days. Questions of justice, whether at the national level or at the global level, and of polarization will be more pressing than ever. Philosophy does not tell us how to make bread and how to tackle concrete social problems. It does not provide us with the first level of knowledge, but philosophy, as concerned with the second level of knowledge, makes us question about what lies behind and what is implied by all these changes. In the contemporary world, where nothing seems stable and secure, we have to learn from philosophical reflection that we live in a limited time and space, that human existence itself is contingent upon the environment, natural or cultural. Truth in an absolute sense, the capital T truth, has become an aporia, a conundrum, a metaphor, the meaning of which can never be caught in human terms as Kantian thing in itself. Thus, we have to accept that truth and falsity in empirical contexts are pragmatic matters to be determined by the criteria given in our specific contexts. Humans are fallible and constantly fluctuating with no fixed identities. A philosophical critique does not aim at the finding of truth, the capital T truth, but the understanding of human conditions and the contingents of human existence. It opens a wider space where we could see the limit and the temporality of what we believe by nurturing a habit to think about the alternative, the other, the opposite. Critiques always include skepticism about the present belief system. When philosophy goes beyond science and technology, it becomes dialectical and eventually dialogues among different parties. The Asian tradition of thought and wisdom is full of dialectical thinking, and Asian humanities traditions could not be properly understood without understanding dialectical worldviews. I think that we can ramify and enrich Asian humanities by learning from a dialectical way of thinking that embraces diverse, sometimes conflicting forces and elements. Dialectics is the logic of contradictions, a way of understanding contraries and contradictions. It is the logic developed through the observation that the world is full of paradoxes and changes in time. Without conflicts and contrasts, there would be no changes. Without diversities and differences, there would be no dialogues. When there is only one voice, there would be no need for dialogues. As long as the original capital T truth remains unknown, we cannot but face diverse positions that are often conflicting and incommensurable. This is where dialogues and dialectical thinking are needed. When something is not apparent nor certain, human reason always diverges into many strands of thought, invoking dialogues, urging us to begin the process of determining what is right and good for us here and now. If there is no dialogue, then we only have an option of war, as we have today. Empirical truth is determined against the background of truth-determining process. It is always relative to what counts as evidence and other probable hypotheses. Dialectical movements are constantly involved here. What is intimated by dialectics is that nothing stands alone. I am I because of you, the other. I can be myself only through the relations with others, whether people or nature. Others are part of me, and I am part of others. I will finish my talk by adding a woman's perspective. A renowned Korean-Japanese businessman, Son Jung-hee, once said, "In our age, the first is AI, the second is AI, and the third is AI." It is true that artificial intelligence is already all around us. The progress in the field of AI has been driven by big increases in computing power and by availability of vast amounts of data, big data. AI will soon prevail in our everyday lives and our culture. But are women, especially Asian women, prepared for this technological revolution? In this era of the new normal, are women able to participate in dialogues as the other? In the age of AI, we must pay attention very carefully to big data. We should ask who owns, interprets, and processes the data for what purposes, because data-driven innovations are taking place all over the world. Every trace that we leave in our excursions into the infinity of cyberspace is collected and accumulated with no exception. The rapid development of AI depends on the exponentially increasing data and the development of machine learning algorithms. AI heavily depends on past data and the information it has received and learned through iteration. As humans can be shaped in various ways through different habits and learning, AI is also created differently depending on the information and the data it has learned. When the data and the information given from the past are biased, it is obvious that AI will also be biased. The problem of bias is a very important and often sensitive issue today. But from a woman's perspective, especially an Asian women's perspective, a neutrality question deeply matters. Dialectical thinking must involve consideration of the other, the marginalized, that takes different social strata hidden from the view of those controlling the technology. Philosophers and scientists, including engineers, cannot but cooperate to solve unforeseen problems like this. And I hope and I believe that they will. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Kim. Our third speaker is Professor Swana Sata-Anand from Thailand. She's a specialist in Buddhist philosophy and other East Asian philosophy. So please start, Swana.
Thank you. Good evening. First of all, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to the Tokyo Forum and Professor NOTOMI for this very exciting invitation. My topic today would be exploring right view in an age of distrust. In this age of pervasive distrust for truth and authority, I propose to revisit the Buddhist concept of right view or Samma Titti as an epistemic and moral reflection in navigating this complex world of crippling uncertainty. While the convergence of crises are overwhelming, we need to deal with distrust, which could easily lead to skepticism, weariness, and indifference. Distrust disengages cooperation and justifies non-cooperation. A ship on the verge of mutiny. PowerPoint, please. Okay, yes, okay. A ship on the verge of mutiny would not be able to withstand a perfect storm. The Collins Dictionary help us name this storm. They just announced the term perma-crisis as the 2022 word of the year. Next, please. I would like to look at distrust for this forum in 3 dimensions. First, general distrust indicates a weary outlook about a highly uncertain world shaken by dangerous disruptive changes. Examples are already cited by many of the speakers. Second is proximate distrust, indicates an attitude of weakening trust in personal relationships, in multiple sources of conflicting information, and in professional and political institutions. Third, existential distrust indicates a disturbing sense of loss of agency, moral compass, ethical guidance, or possibility of hope. I see distrust as an epistemic and psychomoral condition of the heart and mind. My deep concern is based on my understanding that pervasive and lingering massive distrust could only give epistemic justification for skepticism. In my view, skepticism is not only an epistemic attitude about the impossibility of access to truth or that there is no truth at all, but it is also a disempowering, slippery road toward denial of epistemic and ethical capacity of the individual. Next slide, please. Distrust could easily lead to justified indifference to truth as well as to other people. As we know, trust is necessary for cooperation and healthy relationships. It seems to me we, as a global body, are losing trust and collectively heading towards distrust. Next, please. The irony, next slide, please. No more? Okay. The irony is the more we are globally connected, the less we can place our trust in personal relationships, in sources of information, and in social and political institutions. This may be a little overgeneralization, but I think there's a lot of truth in that. I address the issue of distrust by conducting an engagement with the concept of right view from the Buddhist tradition. I hope my brief presentation today would help highlight some implications for cultivating smart trust. Next slide, please. In order to empower the individual to navigate this uncertain world without becoming a fool or an incapacitated skeptic. Okay, just stop there. I would like to bring into attention the fact that the young prince Siddhartha, who had yet to become the Lord Buddha, at age 29, decided to leave his palace in order to search for the truth of suffering. I would say that he was facing an earth-shattering existential doubt. It took him 6 years to discover the Four Noble Truths of suffering, and consequently, right view and not faith is listed as number 1 in his program for ethical practice and spiritual liberation, Buddhists known as the Eightfold Noble Path. Understanding right view. I do not think we can have a perfect panoptic view of the world. We are not God. Huh? Neither can we not having a view on anything. The issue is how to develop right view. The term right here does not mean righteous in the dogmatic self-aggrandizing sense, but indicates a proper way to do things conducive to one's goal. If you want to live, it would be wrong not to breathe, but it would be right to continue breathing. In the Buddhist use of the term right or samma, it means that what is wholesome, which indicates absence of greed, anger, and illusion. In the Buddhist ontology, we do not perceive things without preference, bias, desires, or prior attachment. In Buddhism, next please. In Buddhism, our experience begins with contact between visual organ and visible objects. Because of contact arises feeling. What one feels, one perceives. What one perceives, one reasons about. In Buddhist epistemology, our perception is a convergence of psychomoral factors and cognitive process. In most cases, we do not perceive the world in terms of things as they are. We experience the world as a feeling and as a view, shaped and formed by our psychomoral makeup. When we see a mango tree in full bloom, we do not always simply see a tree. We perceive it as a tree in my garden, as a source of my pride. And then we boast about it to our neighbors and our friends. In this sense, right view is placed at the crossroads of epistemology and moral philosophy. The practice of meditation then is needed to let the mind be mindful of its own workings, and thus liberating the mind to seeing things as they are. If our perception is less influenced by fear, anger, greed, and illusion, it opens up our freedom to cultivate compassion and nurture what I call epistemic generosity. Right view as a middle ground between skepticism and blind faith. I propose that we put more efforts into exploring possibilities from various philosophical traditions, East and West, North and South, to construct a wholesome attitude as an epistemic and moral compass in the midst of contending truth claims, proliferation of information and misinformation, complex interplays of narratives and facts, question of facts and attitudes towards facts, problems of too much readiness to accusation and condemnation while discrediting epistemic generosity. Right view is a consent to have a hypothetical truth waiting further personal verification. It is a middle ground between skepticism and blind faith. Skepticism can easily lead to indifference or non-involvement. Blind faith can be a basis of extremism. PowerPoint, next one, please. Distrust in its best costume is a reasonable avoidance of judgment due to lack of adequate evidence. Next one, please. Next slide, please. Okay, next one. Yes, thank you. Distrust in its best costume is a reasonable avoidance of judgment due to lack of adequate evidence, while in its worst garment, distrust is a sign of both epistemic and moral or ethical despair. Right view seems to be a best possible step towards a restoration of trust, which is the most basic fabric of social reality. You might ask, how is right view developed? The Buddha's suggestion is twofold. First, listening to others or hearing others, and second, self-reflection. Right view is a friend of science in the sense that it cautions against personal and traditional bias. We should not simply believe because the teachings are from our own teachers or from our inherited canons or traditions, or in today's world, from our social media followers. Impersonal facts, which are within the domain of science, need to form a narrative alignment to make sense to us. Facts are to be woven together into a narrative and form an explanation before they can offer a meaningful and plausible account of how we can relate to them. A person does not only see a chart or a fact sheet, but she also thinks, creates, interprets, learns, and makes decisions in her living in the real world of unsettling uncertainty. If we do not begin with a theistic hypothesis about human ontology, it seems to me the Buddhist reflections for a tentative right view is extremely interesting candidate for philosophical reflection. Next PowerPoint, please. Good. Okay. In my view, right view is an exciting compass, can be an exciting compass to help us navigate this world at this time of pervasive distrust in the midst of unsettling uncertainty. A more in-depth exploration of right view will need another occasion. For the time being, I would place my trust in the visions of the Tokyo Forum. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Swana. We have three short presentations, and well, unfortunately, we don't have much time. But well, I'd like to invite the very short comments on other speakers or some additional comment, each 2 minutes. From please, Dermot, start. Please start, Dermot. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Notome, and also to Professor Heisook Kim and to Professor Suwana Sata-Anand. These are very complementary papers, I think. I like the idea, beginning at the end, of the right view. And you mentioned the right view as a combination both of sort of self-critique and also of trying to, in a way, deconstruct our partisan view in order to try to achieve the correct view or the human view. And that's one thing that I would say, that I think the correct view is the human view. And I think we have to be careful, and this goes to the point made by Professor Heisook Kim, that we need to preserve the human, even in the current discourse about the post-human and the transhuman and the AI future of the planet, because the kind of mass knowledge and transformation of knowledge in the era of big data and so on, as we see, needs a controlling overview, the right view, in order to govern it so that it doesn't become a form of mislogia and a kind of a crazy chaos of confusion of ideas. And I think in that regard, a point I made at the beginning of my own talk, the role of the institution, and particularly the university, is extraordinarily important. The universities are largely the result of medieval tradition in Europe, certainly in the form that we know them. And they brought together people from different countries and different cultures in search of a common scientific knowledge, but also of a value system. And I think the absence of that today is obvious in the kind of chaos we have in the internet. So the need for large institutions which can promote knowledge in a critical and careful way, that's really the goal of science. And that's very important that the universities be promoting that true science. Science means knowledge, but knowledge that is critically self-aware. And I think that's something that philosophy can give, because the last point I will make from my own talk is that philosophy has produced many new tools. In primarily, these tools are concepts. I mentioned some of them, but even the concept right view is one of them. I gave my own talk largely from the Western tradition, but we need, as Professor NOTOMI is doing, to show the different concepts that come from the very different traditions of our world. We had the concept of Ubuntu from the African tradition, of a shared fellowship, as it were. We have all kinds of ideas that we need to draw on and put together in a new and systematic and comprehensive way. And I think that's the special role of philosophy confronting the world's problems today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wonderful comment. And please continue, Professor Kim.
Yes, yesterday, we also had a panel on philosophy and science. And while I was listening to the speakers, I had some questions. But since we are running out of time, I will just talk one thing in relation to what today's speakers have talked. Many philosophers, and probably most of philosophers, are talking about universality and also the need for dialogues. But dialogues are not that easy matter to be engaged in. So we really need to think about how to institute a meaningful dialogues. What would be the precondition for us to be involved in the in dialogues? There are factually, in fact, there must be preconditions. All interlocutors and all participants in dialogues must be standing on an equal basis, and also they have a kind of built an attitude towards the others, and all sorts of things. Dialogues and listening are not just natural things. So we have to more focus on how to initiate meaningful dialogues on a concrete level. So everyone may talk about dialogues and the necessity. Actually, Professor NOTOMI and I have talked about this kind of difficulty before we came onto this stage. So listening, as Swana talked about, is also very difficult kind of habit to build. everyone listens, but are we really listening to others? It's really a big question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Suanna, please.
Yes.
Comment.
Thank you. I would like to offer my brief response to the talks by Dermot and Heisook. I really appreciate Dermot's very hopeful message of philosophy as hope throughout history, throughout world history. And I totally agree with him that we need to learn or to know more about those experiences of philosophy as consolation and philosophical sacrifice by the philosophers. And I think if we have that in mind as our intellectual resource, we will think maybe about the problems in the modern world in a slightly different way. I would like to share with Dermot and our friends here that I think there are two challenges that we all face. That is the intensity of economic argument and the omnipresent pressure of speed. The life today seems to be dictated by efficiency, by speed in the name of efficiency. And philosophy, in that sense, I think, is facing a very difficult obstacle. And I also highly appreciate Heisook's very clear exploration of philosophy with and within science and philosophy beyond science. She has raised very interesting and challenging questions about differences, self-critique, meaning of existence, gender and data science, and many others. I think that is a really clear illustration of in what way science needs to be a little bit more humble in its application, maybe not in its methodology, which belongs to the scientist. I would like to end my commentary by sharing with you a little conversation with my nephew, who is in his early 20s. He is in engineering science. I was talking to him somehow about time, temporality. And when he listened to me very patiently and kindly, he said to me, Auntie, in our department, we discuss speed and how to engineer speed. We don't talk about time. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, our short panel is nearly ending. Probably you experienced some philosophers' discussion. And I mean, inside the universities, we are doing the very specialized philosophy. But actually, we are facing the real problems and issues and here and now. But philosophy, the scope is very different from other scopes. We are discussing eternal, beyond space and time. So that is our philosophy's, I think, powerful point. So to encourage reflexiveness or some other rationality. But that is a difficult challenge for us philosophers too. So I hope this continue. We'd like to continue the discussion and include other people, particularly with scientists. Thank you very much for listening. And thank you for three of the speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Notomi, Professor Sanan, Professor Kim, and Professor Moran for shining a spotlight on world philosophy and how it can inspire a better future. Another big hand, please.